/ eschatology. Do we have any more of those, Jen? Because I know the Hammonds didn't get them. And so we want to start with biblical covenants tonight. And Owen, you can go ahead and start if you haven't. I'm thankful that you're here. And last week we talked about interpretation and why proper interpretation, not only of Scripture, but especially of prophecy, is so important. And we settled on the fact that we need to interpret literally the Word of God and not allegorically. Because if you do allegorically, it's going to, you can read into it and you can make up anything you want. Okay, and so we're getting in now to the second aspect of eschatology. And if you've ever been a part of eschatology or eschatological classes studying the end times, I very rarely hear people talk about what we're going to talk about today. And so when they don't talk about it, it distorts all of what they say afterwards. Because what we're going to share with you tonight is the absolute ground foundation of biblical eschatology. If you don't understand what we go over tonight, you'll never get eschatology. Okay, you'll never be able to truly understand what's taking place in the end times. And I would say even now, what we're dealing with in society, if you don't understand these covenants that we're going to talk about. And the reason why is because these covenants give us the boundaries or the outlines of what God established from the beginning. Okay? And so there's so many, and from tonight going forward, I'm going to share these covenants because when we get into next week and the following weeks, you're going to understand more of how we've got so many messed up doctrines and teachings out there, not just on eschatology, but all kinds of other doctrines as well. And so it's very important to understand biblical covenant. So starting in your notes, and in a few minutes, a lot of these scriptures, I left them all in here, but we're not reading them all. Because if we read them all, it's like we'd have to read all year. Because I tried to give every scripture that I could come up with, I've tried to give you the scriptures at every point so that you have them, but we are going to read some of them. So, biblical covenants. In your introduction there, the first point, God's eschatological program. Eschatology program, if you will. You can just copy the word up there. Is determined and prescribed by these covenants. Okay, I need to say that again because, again, this is the foundational stuff. These covenants are the eschatological program. It is determined and prescribed. You can't figure out the end times if you don't understand what these covenants determine and prescribe. Okay? And one's eschatological system is determined and limited by the interpretation. So if you try to read the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel and look at all of the different things that are in those without understanding these covenants, you will have a very limited view and understanding of the end times and get very, very confused and frustrated. And you'll just write it off and say, I don't really care. Okay? Now, the scriptural use of the word covenant is used threefold. Number one, it's between God and man, so horizontal. It's between individuals, okay? It's between man and woman, etc. And then, like for instance, they're getting into a covenant next week. Okay, Brian and Cambria are between man and woman. Okay, that's what marriage is. It's a covenant between two people. And then the third one is there are covenants between nations. Groups of people, tribes, if you will. And these covenants are used both on a temporary basis and on an eternal basis. And especially the covenants that we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to be focusing strongly on these eternal covenants. when it comes to eschatology or the end times, whether they are minor or temporal covenants, those really aren't all that important, okay, in a eschatological sense. So, in other words, in eschatology, the Nazirite vow that Samson partook in, that covenant that he had, doesn't mean anything, really, because it's been fulfilled, it's been done. Okay, does that understand? And I'll throw another one out there that may cause a little bit of ripple, but the Mosaic covenant, the law, the Ten Commandments, eschatologically speaking, the Mosaic covenant has already been fulfilled. It's over and done with, means nothing to eschatology. Okay? It was fulfilled by Jesus. Okay? It's the reason why Paul wrote that we don't live under the law or under the covenant of Moses. We live under grace. Okay? We're not bound by a temporary covenant like Mosaic covenant. Okay, let me just take a short 2-minute aside so that you understand how many have ever wondered why we do not celebrate the Sabbath day? Has anybody ever wondered that? How many know what the Sabbath day was? It was the seventh day of the week. After 6 days, God rested and established. The reason why we don't celebrate the Sabbath day is because the Sabbath day was part of the Mosaic covenant. And so we don't celebrate it anymore because that covenant has been fulfilled. And people, when I say that, will say, well, Pastor, does that mean we can go and kill and commit adultery and lie? Because that was in that covenant too. No, we can't. That's just the short answer. The longer answer is simply this. The reason why we don't equate the two is because in the New Testament, Jesus or the apostles all confirm and reestablish 9 of the 10 commandments found in Scripture. The one that they didn't was the Sabbath, because they understood that we get our rest in Christ. We don't need a day for it. Now, it's still wise to take a day off. Otherwise, you're just going to burn yourself up. But not because of the Sabbath day. And that's why in the New Testament they said, don't fight about your holy days, because they've been accomplished. But that's why Jesus, even like the concept of committing adultery in the Old Testament, that was one thing, but Jesus actually elevated it and said, when you look on somebody wrong with that in your heart, you've already committed. So it doesn't abolish the Old Testament law because it's been reestablished in the New Covenant, but the Sabbath never was. In fact, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, broke the Sabbath, if you will, all kinds of times. So the Mosaic or Old Testament law does not play into eschatology because the Mosaic or the law covenant has already been finished and fulfilled. Does that make sense? But there's 4 other covenants that God makes. And these are ones that we're going to talk about. So the definition there, a sovereign disposition. Sovereign disposition of God is how you can define a covenant, in which he establishes an unconditional or a declarative compact with man. And this kind of a disposition of God obligates himself. Now, we don't obligate God. God obligates himself in grace by this formula, the I will formula. I will do this. I will do this. I will do that. I will lead you here. I will establish this. Okay? Those are all based off of the declarative statement, and it obligates God it puts him in the disposition to pass to whoever he is in covenant with whatever he establishes in his will. Okay? And then the second one is a proposal of God. Okay, this is where he promises on a conditional basis or a mutual compact with man by the contingent words, if you will. Okay? If you will obey, then I will bless. Okay? It's a covenant, but it's not based solely on what God declares. It's based on what you and I do. Okay? Does that make sense? So those are the 2 different kinds of covenants. One that obligates God. God obligates himself to make it happen. and others that only come to fulfillment if we participate in that kind of a covenant, or man, I should say. Okay, there's two different kinds of covenants, and I've got these in your notes. Number one, it's a conditional. This is kind of going what we just talked about, but it's a conditional covenant. And a conditional covenant is dependent for fulfillment upon the recipient of the covenant. Okay, so if I make a covenant with Dennis, and it is a conditional covenant that I've made with Dennis, the only way that covenant gets fulfilled is based on what Dennis does. Right? Because there's conditions. Dennis, I will do this if you do that. Okay? Then the second one, though, is an unconditional covenant. And this is solely dependent for fulfillment on the one that makes the covenant. So back to me and Dennis. If I say without any conditions, and I say, Dennis, I'm going to do that, now I have obligated myself to accomplish regardless of what he does. That's key to understand. Regardless of how he lives, regardless of what he does, I have made a covenant based on my own self. Now, when you really get down to it, if this was a real analogy, what do I really have to, my words, what? Not much. But God can't break his word. So when God makes an unconditional covenant, God is establishing it is going to happen no matter what Dennis does. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now some of the nature of these covenants that we're going to get into. Number one there, it's literal. These covenants that we're going to reveal tonight are literal covenants that are given by God. And we've already talked about the Mosaic covenant, that it wasn't eternal. The second in your notes there, these are eternal. These four covenants that we are going to talk about, when God established it from that point forward, because they are unconditional, they are also eternal. Which means that God hasn't fulfilled these covenants yet. And that's what the end time is all about. The end time is God fulfilling these four covenants. It's actually one main covenant and three covenants that support the one covenant. And we'll get into all that. And don't freak out yet. Okay, you'll get it here in just a second. But they're eternal. And since these are solely dependent on the integrity of God for their fulfillment, not on what man does, they must be considered as unconditional, obviously. Now, I also put in there, these were made with a covenantal people, Israel. Okay? And if you want to put next to that, it's made with Israel through Abraham. Okay? Romans 9:4. Declan, go ahead and bring that up. Who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of God and the promises. Okay? He gave them to Israel. Now let me ask this question. How many of you here tonight are Israelites? You're Jewish. Maybe one or two. Okay? So you have to understand these covenants were not made with us. Okay, can I say that again? Get this, write this in your note. These covenants were not made with us. Now for the two of you that raised your hand, these covenants apply to you. But they don't apply to us. Which lets me know something about the end times. All of the fear-mongering of the end times doesn't apply to us, because all of the end times is the fulfillment of the covenants. So I don't have to live in fear. All of the covenants, or all of the end times that we're dealing with today, don't apply or pertain to us. They pertain to Israel, to the Jew. Because the fulfillment of the covenants is what the end times that we have classified the end times are all about. Okay? So there's things that we have heard and seen, and I've mentioned it to you maybe last week, but there's a couple of statements even recently that I've seen posted that I cringe when I see them. I've seen posted, Revelation is playing right out before our eyes. Revelation hasn't started yet. Okay? I shouldn't say that, because Revelation 2 and 3 has started. But chapters 4 and on haven't started yet. Nothing that we have seen in the world today have anything to do with Revelation 4 up to chapter 21 or 22. None of it. Okay, so Revelation isn't playing out in front of us. And you're going to see that over the coming weeks. The mark of the beast, when the vaccine came out, people were saying, that's going to be the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is at least, if the rapture happens tonight, 3.5 years away. And when the people get the mark of the beast, they're not going to accidentally get it. Because part of the mark of the beast is that they will worship the beast. And the problem with the vaccine being the mark of the beast is nobody knows who the beast is yet, because the beast isn't going to be revealed until the church is gone. So do you see how we've messed up all of this end time because we don't understand these covenants? Okay, pull up Ephesians 2:11 and 12, Declan. Gentiles, this is in your notes, Gentiles never received a covenant from God. Wherefore remember that you being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh, made by hands. Verse 12, that at that time you were without Christ. Now this is before you come into Christ. Okay? You were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. Now unless you're Jewish, you were an alien from the commonwealth of Israel. And strangers from the covenants of promise. So until you came to Christ, there was not a covenant for you, Gentile. Okay? God had no covenants for the Gentiles. Now, when you came to Christ, you took on something different, and we'll talk about that in weeks to come. And you had no hope, and you were without God in the world. Okay? So these covenants were made with a certain people, Israel. It's the reason, let me just sound political for 2 seconds. Can I just tell you the only thing that I vote for, and this is a secret, is I vote for whoever is for Israel. I don't care about any of their other policies. If they are for Israel, they're going to get my vote. Because there's a principle in Scripture, he who blesses Israel will be blessed. Okay? Now you can go out and figure out which candidates are for Israel and not for Israel on your own. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but people have asked, well, what dictates how you vote? That's it. The reason why is because all the other stuff comes and goes. How many times have we had the left in charge and how many times have we had the right in charge, and really nothing's any better? But when we're attached to somebody that is for Israel, God blesses the nation. That's just an aside. So let's go into the main covenant, which is the Abrahamic covenant. That's in your notes there. So Declan, pull up Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, 2, and 3. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show you. Keep going, verse 2. And I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Verse 3, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee all families of the earth will be blessed. Okay? So this covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, and we're going to give another scripture that reaffirms the Abrahamic covenant in a second. But this Abrahamic covenant is the basis for the entire covenant program. Okay? And I'm going to show you here that there's 3 points to this covenant in just a second. But it's the basis of everything that happens in eschatology, and it's all based on the Abrahamic covenant. That's why I said there's one main covenant, and then there's 3 other covenants, and you're going to see that in a minute, that support the Abrahamic covenant. And these 4 eternal covenants, unconditional covenants that God said is going to happen, haven't happened yet, but they will. The next thing in your notes, the eternal aspect of this covenant guarantees Israel a permanent national existence. I will make thee a great nation. Now, I want you to notice in the passage that we read in Genesis 12, it's not talking about a heavenly nation. It's a covenant on earth. Okay? And it says that Israel will be guaranteed to have a permanent national existence, a perpetual title to the land of promise and continued blessings. Those are the 3 arms of this covenant. A national existence, land, a perpetual title to land, and continued blessings. Those 3 things. Now, these 3 things have not happened yet for the nation of Israel. Well, Pastor, they came back and got their land in 1948. No, they didn't. They became a country. But if you look at the boundaries of the promised land in Scripture, Israel does not have that property yet. They still aren't in the promised land. They still don't have all of the property. So there's things that haven't happened yet. Okay? The next point in your notes, this covenant becomes the seed from which are brought forth all of the later covenants with Israel. This covenant, I'm going to make you a great nation, you're going to have a land, and I'm going to continue to bless you. Those 3 things. That covenant with God. And remember, it's an unconditional covenant. It didn't matter what Abraham was going to do, Isaac was going to do, Jacob was going to do, Joseph was going to do, David was going to do. It didn't matter what any Jew did from that point forward. God was going to make those 3 things happen for the nation of Israel, not based on the person, but based on the God that gave the covenant and established the covenant. So I want to give you some relationship to the 3 other covenants, and then we'll come back. We'll circle back to these 3 covenants here in a few minutes. But in the Abrahamic covenant and the Palestinian covenant, that's your notes there. Declan, if you'll pull up Genesis 13, 14 to 17. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward, southward, eastward, westward. It's pretty broad. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. And the last verse, arise, walk through the land in the length of it, in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Okay, the Palestinian covenant, we're going to come back to that, but this is the Abrahamic covenant promised national land. The Palestinian covenant is the restoration to that land, and we're going to deal with that in a few minutes. There's a bunch of scriptures, Deuteronomy, Ezekiel, that you can look at later that bring up that Palestinian. The second covenant that is tied to Abrahamic covenant is what we call the new covenant. How many have ever heard of that? Okay, now I don't want to blow anybody's theological bubbles, but the new covenant was not designed for whom? Right. It was not designed for us. Because we're not Jews. Okay? Now, when we get to that, now you're just going to have to, I'm just going to give you a secret. You're going to have to just be confused for a while as we get down further weeks, because we're going to spend a lot of time identifying how the church relates to all of this. Okay, but if I start going off on that tangent, we'll never set the main foundation to get everything else to where we can understand it in the future. Okay? So, unfortunately, you're not going to walk away tonight having all the answers to the end time. Okay, maybe in a couple of months. I was going to say weeks, but Genesis 22 verse 18 says this. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So the new covenant with Abraham or the Abrahamic covenant and the new covenant with Israel was the promise of redemption, both national and universal. So you saw in that scripture, the new covenant is for us in a certain respect, but not the actual covenant. We receive the new covenant through Abraham and through Israel, but the primary recipient of that covenant is Abraham and his seed after him. Galatians 3:16. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. Okay? In other words, when that covenant came forth, the new covenant and the Abrahamic covenant together, it was not to many seeds, it was to one seed, to Israel. Okay? Now, don't, again, freak out and go home thinking that you're never going to make it to heaven. This has nothing to do with that. We'll get to that later. Okay? But through the new covenant with Israel, Israel's spiritual blessings and redemption are going to be found. And then the third one is the Davidic covenant. Abraham promised numerous descendants to form a great nation. Genesis 17, verse 2 through 6. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, with Abraham, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. That was the end. I thought there was one more verse, but it's not. It's in my notes. It was right. Kings, okay? Now, I want you to notice something. The reason why I laugh at politicians trying to figure out the Middle East stuff is because they're looking at it politically. It goes back to then. Abraham received a promise, and he was supposed to be the promised child, Isaac, and Abraham and Sarah got hasty and said God couldn't do it, so he went and I think it was either Paul or Randy. Randy taught on it Sunday. I went and got Hagar and said, okay, we're going to have children. And so he became the father of many nations, but it's through the chosen seed of Isaac that the kings would rise. Okay? And that's why you're never going to figure the Middle East out, because there's two factions going all the way back, and it'll never be fixed politically. Okay, so I want to talk here just for a minute about these three promises of the Abrahamic covenant before we go further. Number one, it's individual. There are individual promises to Abraham. He would be father of great nation, including kings and nations other than the seed itself, through Ishmael and the descendants there. And God promises that his name shall be great, and he himself would be a blessing. Do you know that the name of Abraham is as great in Jewish culture as it is in the Islamic culture? Just for a different reason. And that's why there's a battle going on. Okay, the second promise is that it would be a national, or to his seed. He promises, respecting Israel, that the nation would be great. It would be innumerable. It would be expressed as everlasting and an everlasting possession. Now let me ask you this. Is the nation Israel innumerable yet? No. And it's not everlasting yet, because they haven't taken over their territory. That's still to come. That's what the end times are all about. And then the third one is universal blessings. All the families of the earth will be blessed. And so in the development of this covenant, it's absolutely imperative that we keep the different areas in which the promise was given clearly in mind, because if the things that were in covenant in one area are transferred to another area, only confusion will happen. And so, for instance, personal promises to Abraham cannot be transferred to the nation. And promises to Israel cannot be transferred to the Gentiles. And that is what has caused a lot of the confusion. Let me ask you this, because we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but how many have ever heard this, similar to this statement, that the church is the spiritual Israel? Or that the church has taken the place of Israel, that the church is now God's chosen people and Israel isn't? It's just by raising your hand. Have you heard that? Okay, it's from hell. Okay, the church has not replaced Israel. Israel is still God's chosen people. Now, he has allowed us to be grafted in. But see, and let me just give you a hint for a couple of months or weeks down the road. The church is made up of people that the Bible says is not Jewish, is not Gentile, is not barbarian, is not male or female, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. We are a totally different group of people. Okay? And the way God deals with us is totally different than what the way he deals with Israel. And we'll get into that in coming weeks. So the character of the Abrahamic covenant, that's in your notes there, the character. Since it's literal, it has to be fulfilled literally. Does that make sense? So Israel must be preserved, converted, and restored. And since it's unconditional, these events in Israel's national life are inevitable. They're going to happen. The character of, well, in my notes it's E. I don't know what your notes are. Yes. I don't know. There's 3 lines of promises: individual, national, universal. The next blank is character, whatever letter that is. I'll have to show you. But in your notes where we talked about the provision of the covenant, the 3 different branches, individual promises, do you see that in your notes? It would be a blank where you wrote it. And then the second one is national. It says his seed. And then universal, those 3. Have you found those? We just talked about that. You're all looking at me like I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, have you fit those? Has anybody written those 3 words, individual, national, or universal? Okay. The next blank after the word universal is character. Okay. That's where we're at right now. Okay. We'll have to fix that later. The character of the Abrahamic covenant. It's literal, so it has to be fulfilled literally. Okay? And it's inevitable to be fulfilled. Okay? And part of the character, and some of this in your notes, I put some highlights. I'm going by my notes, which has a whole lot more. Like you've got like 10 pages there. I got about 50 pages up here. Okay? So some of this, when I've highlighted your blanks, so I'll try to remember to tell you which word it is. And so while the covenant is unconditional, the giving of covenant was established on Abraham leaving Ur, and then it was all in God's hands. That's the character of this covenant. It's going to happen. There's going to come a time where Israel has both land, nations, and universal blessings. Okay, the next blank is eschatological implications of the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, and this is, again, the end time implications. Israel has promised regarding a land and a seed. Those 2 things, land and seed. These determine the future program of God. That there's going to be a land and there's going to be a seed. And so these words, seed and land, along with the blessings, summarize the essential features of the end times. Okay? So when we get to all of the really interesting, freaky things about the end time, you have to go back and remember what is really happening. What's happening is God is fulfilling this covenant to establish Abraham's land, his seed, and his blessings. The Great Tribulation, the beast, all of the stuff that goes on is in relation to God revealing and resurrecting and restoring the land, the seed, and the blessings of Israel. Okay? I can't say that enough. It's Israel. Everybody say it's Israel. Okay? And so it's impossible to escape the conclusion that this is the physical seed of Abraham and to the land that was given. And how do we know that it didn't? Because Abraham didn't just have, Abraham was not a Jew, right? The first Jew was Jacob. I shouldn't say the first Jew, the first Israelite. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. He's the first Israelite. So how do we know that the promise that Abraham made goes through Jacob? Because Isaac was the promised seed of Abraham, and Isaac gave the promise to Jacob. And so then it goes through Jacob's seed becoming Israel. Okay, that's how we get that. So here's the question. Does the Abrahamic covenant promise to Israel a permanent existence as a nation? Yes. And if it does, then the church cannot fulfill the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, because the church will never be a nation. Okay, the second question, does the Abrahamic covenant promise Israel permanent possession of a promised land? Yes, it does. And if it does, then Israel must yet come into the possession of that land. For she's never really had it before. Okay? So let me just, I'm going to do this very quickly, like within 5 minutes. And this is, I don't think this is even in your notes. But who is the seed of Abraham? Okay? Those to whom the promise continued, i.e. Isaac and Jacob, we talked about that, and their descendants. That's the natural descendants of the seed of Abraham. There is a spiritual lineage within the natural. Okay? In other words, the Jews that have come to Christ, and remember I said those that are of Christ is a totally different people. You're not Jew or Greek or Gentile or barbarian or slave or bond. For all are one. Okay? So there's a spiritual component within the natural component. The spiritual Jews that have come to an understanding that Christ is their Messiah. That have come and basically you give up your Gentile or your Jewness to be Christian. Okay? There's the spiritual seed who is not the Israelite. There are those Gentiles. That's you and I. We are the seed of Abraham based on 1/3 of the component of the covenant, and that is that all nations and families will be blessed. Okay? Galatians 3:6-9, Declan. Even as Abraham believed God, that it was accounted to him for righteousness. Know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the heathen through faith, preached before the gospel unto Abraham, saying, in thee shall all nations be blessed. So then they which be of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. So we become their seed through his seed through faith. But it's the faith seed, if you will. And so we're blessed because of him, but we're not promised land and we're not promised seed. Okay, so we fulfill that third part, if you will. Okay? Now let me just skip over to the next one is the Palestinian covenant. That's the next line that you have blank. The Palestinian covenant. We've already read Genesis 17:7 and 8, I believe. Go ahead and throw it back up there real quick, Declan. It's the next one in your list, Genesis 17:7. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. Verse 8. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Okay? So this is what was considered the Palestinian covenant to the Jews. And it's a reaffirmation of the first part of the Abrahamic, that there would be a nation, that there would be a land, if you will. It's reiterated in your notes. I think I left Deuteronomy 30, 1 through 30, I think is written in there. If not, just write that in there, Deuteronomy 30, 1 through 30. It reiterates the Palestinian covenant. Okay, the next blank in your lines is the importance of the covenant. Why is the Palestinian covenant important? Okay. Again, in your notes there, it reaffirms to Israel plainly their title deed to the promised land. Do you want to know why the Palestinians and Israel are fighting over the West Bank and Gaza and all that all of the time? Because the Israelites believe that God has given them the title deed to the promised land, and the Palestinians think it's their land. Okay? Now, the Palestinians are going to find out eventually that it is their land. Several years down the road, probably. So the introduction of a conditional covenant that they were living under, the Mosaic covenant, could not and did not set aside the promise of the purpose of God in the Abrahamic covenant, but the Palestinian covenant does. It amplifies the land feature of the Abrahamic covenant. So now in your notes, the provision of the covenant. And it's affirmed in Ezekiel chapter 16. But number one, under the provision of the covenant, the nation will be plucked off the land for its unfaithfulness. Deuteronomy 28 and chapter 30. So there came a time when Israel was plucked out of the promised land. Did that happen? Yes. Nebuchadnezzar came in, Babylon came in, plucked them off their land, took them captive. Okay? There will be a future repentance to Israel. The next line in your notes, the Messiah will return. Deuteronomy 30, the Messiah will return. Yes. Palestinian covenant. This is where we're at right now. Yep. Okay, so we're back here. You should be under number 4 right now, the Palestinian covenant. Okay? That should be number 4. Oh my goodness, let me see that real quick. You know what happened? There's a number missing. There is no 3 in your notes here. For some people, I guess. So that must be the problem. So I'll have to get you guys a copy. Another copy. Yeah, because see, you're going from 2 to 4, which is Abrahamic, and you're missing the Palestinian in these notes. So number 4 is going to be the Davidic covenant. Davidic. Okay, that's going to be number 4. So you've gone ahead and you filled in lines that shouldn't be, because you're missing 2. You're missing number 3 of the notes. I'll have to find out why that happened. So I apologize for messing you all up. Well, listen, I'm almost done with the Palestinian, then we'll get to number 4 in your notes. Okay, so just listen for just a second. The Palestinian covenant has to do with land. Okay? And part of it is the promise that their Messiah will return to that land. Okay? And that Israel will be restored to that particular land, and Israel will be converted as a nation. Okay? It's an unconditional eternal covenant, just like the Abrahamic covenant. Okay? And the thing that implicates it in eschatology is that Israel has to be converted and regathered from her wide world dispersion and installed in her land. Okay? That hasn't happened yet. So again, the end times is about reestablishing the Abrahamic, or fulfilling the Abrahamic, the Palestinian covenant. Now, number 4 in your notes. Everybody has a number 4? Okay, that's where we're going to kick off from. That's the Davidic covenant. And next to it says 2 Samuel 7. All right. 2 Samuel 7, Declan, real quick. And when thy days be fulfilled, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers. I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, he shall be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee. And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. That is the Davidic covenant. He's talking to David there. And he gives some things to David. And notice that he says that you're going to have a son, Solomon, and I'm going to establish his kingdom forever. And so we know that Solomon's kids reigned for a while, and if you do the genealogies, it's why genealogies are in the Bible, even though you don't understand the names. It leads them back and lets you know that Jesus Christ was from the line of David and Solomon. Okay? And so there's coming a day where Jesus Christ will sit on David's throne in the end times. We're going to talk about all of that. That's the Davidic covenant. So the Palestinian covenant is the land. The Davidic covenant is the seed and the nation that supports the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, does that make sense? So I think the next line in your notes there that you have to fill in is provision for the Davidic covenant. We talked about some of this already. David's going to have a kid, Solomon. Solomon shall build the temple instead of David. He did that. The throne of his kingdom is going to be established forever. That hasn't happened yet. Okay, some of these are probably not in your notes because I'm throwing a bunch of information. Okay? The throne will not be taken away from Solomon like it was Saul. So that's why he has a right to be the king. And in probably 6 weeks, we're going to talk about the kingdom and why Jesus has the rightful authority to sit on the throne. Okay? The expression forever is signified that David's authority and that David's kingdom or rule over Israel shall never be taken away from David's posterity, including Jesus. And then I left, I think in one of your notes there, covenant is confirmed, and I left a whole bunch of scriptures. Did I do that? Okay, so you can read all those later. But that's where the Davidic covenant was confirmed. I want to talk a little bit about the character of the way it is. Number 1 there in your notes, it's unconditional. The Davidic covenant is unconditional. And the second line there, it's called eternal. Unconditional and eternal. In Samuel 7, Isaiah 55, Ezekiel 37. I gave those to you. The Davidic covenant amplifies the seed and not the land. Remember, Palestinian did the land, David does the seed. And it's reconfirmed over and over. It is this is in your notes, a literal covenant. The Davidic covenant is a literal covenant. And the words and the sentences are plain to see. You can't allegorize them. You can't spiritualize them. Okay, the kingdom of David is not a spiritual kingdom. It is a literal kingdom that has not come into being yet. It was when David was there, but then they were plucked out of the area. They were dispersed, taken into captivity, and they never came back into. And when Israel became a country in 1948, they did not set up the Davidic throne. Okay? But there's coming a day when the throne is going to be set back up in Israel. No, this will be an actual government. Okay, for unto us a son is born, unto us a child is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. There is going to be a literal, I'll just give you the sneak peek, the whole millennium is going to have David's household ruling the earth through Christ, because Christ is of David's lineage. Okay? The words and sentences are very clear. It's distinctly associated with the Jewish nation and no other nation. It's David's seed. Okay? It's called a perpetual covenant, or one that's going to endure forever. Then in your notes, which this is really key, it was confirmed by an oath. Oath. It was confirmed by an oath. And when God makes an oath, he can't break it. Psalm 132, Psalm 89. There's some scriptures there. Psalm 89, God says it so strongly. He says this, my covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. So there's coming a day when David's throne is going to be established forever. Okay? It's going to be a literal fulfillment. Now, in each one of these covenants, some of the things have already come to pass. Parts of it. It just hasn't been fulfilled. David did have a son. Named him Solomon. Solomon did build the temple. Solomon did set up the lineage of Christ. Okay, so some things have been fulfilled. Or some things have happened. It just hasn't been fulfilled as a covenant. Down into your notes, the eschatological implications. Number one there, it must be preserved as a nation. Israel must be preserved as a nation. Okay? It's not talking about a spiritual group of people. It's the Jewish nation must be preserved. And Israel must have a national existence and be brought back into the land of their inheritance. That's that next word, the land of their inheritance. Okay? That hasn't happened yet either. And so part of the implication is that Jesus, David's offspring, must return to earth bodily, literally, to reign over David's covenanted kingdom. Does that make sense? Okay? And a literal earthly kingdom must be constituted. It's going to happen. Okay, now the new covenant. That's number 5, the new covenant. Churches like to talk about the new covenant being for the church. The new covenant is not for the church. The new covenant is still for Israel. Okay? So the importance of this covenant, I'm going to go quickly because we're going to revisit this stuff, so don't panic. It guarantees Israel a converted heart as the foundation of her blessings. Okay, listen, I'm just going to give you the timing so that you know, and then I'll prove it all a couple weeks down the road. But when Christ comes back at the millennium and he puts his feet down on the earth, there is going to be a mass conversion of Jewish people to whom the Messiah is. They missed him at his first advent, but when he comes back at his second, there's going to be a mass conversion and their hearts are going to be converted, and that's what's going to happen to kick off the millennium. And that's when the establishment of these covenants are going to come back into play. Does that make sense? You understand that? Not necessarily timing. We're going to get all that. Okay? The neat thing about this new covenant is it can only be affected by a permanent sacrifice, which was Calvary. Okay? It's the reason why I've said to you in recent weeks that we have misquoted the scripture that says that they overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Okay? That is a tribulation scripture. Those that are in the tribulation, that they didn't make it in the rapture, they're still here on the earth. They have two ways that they're going to be saved. One is through the blood of the Lamb, because it's the one-time sacrifice for all time. And number two, they're going to have their word declare. And that's what's going to set them free. And then most likely when they confess it, it's going to cost them their life until they're resurrected. We'll talk about all that too coming up. Okay, here's some provisions for the new covenant. We're not going to read this now because I'm running out of time, but you can look up Jeremiah 31. It's an unconditional grace covenant, resting on the I will of God. It's an everlasting covenant. The next one in your notes, it promises the impartation of a renewed mind and heart, which we call regeneration. Now, do you see why some people preach that the new covenant is for us? Because we're dwelling in some of these blessings, but this covenant, we're getting some of the blessings of it, but it's going to be fulfilled literally in Israel at the start of the millennium. Okay? It provides for restoration of favor and blessing. Because of Israel's rejection, and we're going to talk about all this stuff too, but because they rejected him as Messiah, he allows us Gentiles to bask in the promises of the New Testament and the New Covenant. And what we're experiencing is what is literally going to happen to Israel, but we're getting it by faith. In other words, we're reaching into the future and bringing back the fulfillments of this covenant for a people that will believe in him. Okay? There will be forgiveness. The teaching ministry of the Holy Ghost will be reestablished in the millennium. And as is always the case, Israel will be in their land, blessed in their land. The seed will be there. They will be ruling and reigning, and the Lord will bless them. The sanctuary will be rebuilt. Okay? Now, I hear all the time, they're getting ready to rebuild the sanctuary. Okay? What that tells me is this, that the coming of the Lord to gather his saints on high could happen at any moment. Okay? The rapture could take place at any time. But the sanctuary is not going to be built for at least 7 more years. Okay? Because that won't be happening until the beginning of the millennium. We'll get into that. That'll be, here's what I'm trying to teach this in block form, so which simply means this. We're going to end up going forward and coming back, and then going forward again. So I'm talking about these covenants. These covenants are going to take place a minimum, if the Lord came tonight, these covenants will not be fulfilled for a minimum of 7 years. Okay? At the end of the tribulation, then the millennium kicks off. And that's when all of this stuff comes back together. And we'll show you that as we progress. I'm trying to remember what section 3 on my notes are. I think we get into the present age next week and how it all plays out. But that's why I said you're not going to have all the answers at the end of tonight, but just hang on, and we'll get there. Okay. In your notes, I've given you the answers, so you've got the answers at the end. But the character of the New Testament is eternal. There's several blanks there that you still have, but I want to get down here. I want to give you 2. If you can switch over to your notes until you get to the relation of the church to the new covenant. If Catalyst wants to head out, they can head out at this time. If you all can give me about 5 more minutes. I don't want to come back to these covenants next week. I want to get into the next section. Okay, it will be there will be a statement that says the view of the blank. That's where I want to start. Oh, you already cheated and went to the answers, didn't you? Figure somebody would. So we're at that point, the view of and this is the relationship or the relation of the church to these covenants, especially the new covenant. Okay? And there's two views that I want to share. And they're really a blending of two views, so however you want to think about it, you can think about it. But the first one is the view of the dispensationalist. That's where we're at right now, the view of the dispensationalist. The dispensationalist, remember we talked last week, we looked at the chart. You've got the chart after we talked about interpretation and before we got into covenants. That chart, that's a dispensationalist chart. And a strict dispensationalist will break everything off so that this doesn't apply to this dispensation and this doesn't apply. And I'm not a strict dispensationalist. Say that 100 times. I believe that there is overflow in both. For instance, the dispensation of grace. The Bible says it plainly that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So that wasn't in the same dispensation. So I'm but I understand the concept of dispensations or seasons, times. Okay? So a strict dispensationalist will say that the church has no relation to the covenants. That the covenant of the letter is made with Israel, not with us. It's not about us. We get the benefit of it maybe. And Israel, because they didn't accept the blessing or they didn't accept the covenants, God decided, well, I'm going to go ahead and offer it to the Gentiles. Okay, that's the dispensationalist viewpoint. Now, a dispensationalist will try to connect the word gospel to covenant. Okay? The gospel is not a covenant. The gospel is the good news of God's salvation or redemption, however you want to say it. It's not a covenant. Okay? You can't go into covenant with the gospel. You can only go into covenant with Christ. You see the difference? But an Israelite can go into covenant with the land, with the seed, with the blessings. Okay, does that make sense when I say that? Okay. The gospel is for the church. It's for us. The tools of redemption are for us. But the new covenant isn't for us, literally. The new covenant is going to be for Israel. We get the benefits of it ahead of time. Okay? So I can be in agreement with a dispensationalist that yes, the primary fulfillment of these covenants aren't for me, but I get the blessings of it because Israel rejected it. Okay? But then there's a second meaning, and that in your notes there is the twofold fulfillment. I think I wrote Schofield and Grant next to it maybe. Okay, Schofield, Bible, if you know that's who I'm talking about there. And what they believe is that the prophecies of the new covenant are twofold fulfillment. That there is a fulfillment in the church, but the primary fulfillment is in Israel. Okay? I can't really argue with either one of those viewpoints. That God just chose us because Israel ignored it and rejected it, or that there was two fulfillments in the new covenant given to us and a second or primary fulfillment in Israel. You really can't, to me, there's not really that much difference in terms there. The bottom line is this. God can fulfill partially in us that third, or really the fourth covenant, the new covenant. But there's so many other covenants that are tied together to the Abrahamic covenant that does not apply to us. Okay, so there has to be a literal fulfillment in Israel. Okay, now here's the reason why this is so important, and you can look at fill in the answers later. But here's why it's important to understand these covenants in order to understand eschatology or the end times. Okay? If you can get the concept of the Abrahamic covenant down, you've got the other three down, okay? It all applies to that. But here's why it's so important, is because it defines what's actually happening when we come to the end time stuff. Okay? None of those covenants are being primarily fulfilled today. Why is everything so what? Well, because the prince and the power of the air is still here. He's not bound. Well, I believe it's going to escalate as we get closer. But here's the problem that I have always had with even teaching this, is because when I say that nothing in Revelation has happened yet, nothing has happened yet. But we're dealing with a bunch of junk. And what we think is the end times. Can I tell you this? Peter and James and John preached that they lived in the end times. That was 2,000 years ago. Okay? And when we get to talking about the three views of the rapture and the millennial here in coming weeks, and again, I can't remember exactly what our next step is in my notes for starting next week. But when we get into it, one of the reasons why I believe in the pre-tribulation, amongst many other things, and I'll give you all three viewpoints, and I'm not going to argue if you don't agree with me. I'm just going to tell you the way that I believe I can show it in Scripture. But the biggest reason why I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, which means that the church is taken away before the tribulation of God starts, is because he, through the establishment of the Word, wanted his people, and the early church bought into it, it's called the imminency, the immediate coming of the Lord. You don't know when God's going to return for us, when the trumpet's going to sound and we're going to be caught away. It could happen at any moment. And so we don't know when he's going to come, so we should be occupying until he does. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Well, and the reason why I believe that is because if he's going to come and take his church after in mid or post-trib, we can time out when he's coming. Okay? Because of the points that he gives us, and we're going to be talking about all of that. So here's the thing. The reason why I believe that we're dealing with this stuff. Well, let me just... I want to say this without criticizing, but we're not dealing with anything greater than it's ever been dealt with since time began. We think we do. But the reason why we do is because we as humans have connected with the enemy, if you will, because there is a scripture in Daniel, I want to say it's in Daniel 7, but I can't be sure of the chapter and verse, but it says that he will change the times and seasons and make us weary the saints. Okay? Can I tell you, when the computer was created, it was supposed to initiate 20-hour work weeks. That was the goal of the computer. Because we can do things so much quicker and easier, we can just do it in 20 hours instead of 40. How many have worked 20 hours a week since then? Okay? So it's not that I used to think this when I was a kid, and because my dad would say, we dealt with it all. Yeah, Dad, and you walked uphill both ways to school in the snow. Okay? But as I've gotten older, I've realized that my kids are not dealing with really anything more than we are. They're just dealing with it at a more rapid pace. And the reason why it's a more rapid pace is because of the computer, of television. I mean, you think about it. When I was growing up, number one, you didn't have cable. So you didn't have a bunch of channels. We had 3 channels and the 2 local channels that came in all fuzzy. And I was the remote. Actually, it was so bad in my house that we actually had my mom worked for the schools, and we had a school computer monitor that was able to plug into a VCR that picked up the channels. Okay? What am I saying? Well, I'm saying, okay, so you had 3 or 4 news broadcasts 3 or 4 times a day, and that's it. Well, now you got it all the time. And now you've got news that comes from all different kinds of places. You don't even know their backgrounds. And so all of a sudden, everything seems to be happening Man, it's getting so much worse than what it was. Can I tell you, it hasn't. It's just gotten faster. And so I believe that the faster it gets and the more we realize it, here's why I believe it seems to be getting worse. Now, I will be the last person to try to tell you when Jesus is going to call us home. I've heard that he's coming soon. I'm 52 years old, so for 50 years, first 2 years I didn't understand what they were saying. For 50 years I've heard Jesus is coming soon. Okay? And I get into this, not debate, but I just feel bad. I was like, well, yeah, he's still coming soon because he's 50 years closer. You know? But here's the thing, is I believe he's coming soon. Now, that soon could be another 1,000 years. I don't know. If it is, I won't be here to find out. Okay? So, but the reason why I believe that Jesus is coming soon is not because of what's happening in the world, other than I'm able to see now the precursors of how the beast could set up a mark. The technology's there now. It wasn't there when I was a kid. Okay, so there's technology there. There is ways to move vast groups of armies very quickly that wasn't there before. Okay, but does that mean it's happening right now? No, I just see that it can happen very quickly. And the second reason why I believe the Lord is coming soon is because the quicker and the more that we deal with all of the stuff that we think is so much and so heavy now, is simply to remind people that Jesus is coming. Now, I wasn't there, but I can imagine what America felt like on December 7th, 1941. And when Pearl Harbor happened. Now, the news didn't get out as fast, but I think I can probably picture that there were people that were getting the news that were feeling the same I felt on 9/11. Okay? And even if you go back to World War I, and even if you go back to the Spanish Inquisition, and even if you go back to the War of 1812, and even if you go back to the Spanish pandemic, and even if you go back to all these things throughout the history of time, all the way back to the beginning, there has always been something that is huge in the world. But like I said, you didn't hear about it as quick. It wasn't instant. For instance, the Queen Elizabeth passed away today. We wouldn't have heard of that until the earliest tomorrow or the next day. We knew 5 minutes after she had passed. Okay, that's what's different now than any other time of the seasons of the world. And so it's not all this stuff is happening, it's just that it's happening and we're hearing about it. Okay? I wish I could say that everything that's happening in America is new. It's just that it's new here. Okay? Crime rates have spiked throughout history in different areas, in different worlds, in different countries, in different nations. I wish I could tell you that there wasn't any murder in the Bible. Talk to Tamar. Put a spike right through the dude's temples. Okay? So does that make sense? So all this stuff is happening. The difference is we're seeing some of the things that could apply post-rapture. Now, I invite you to stand. I kept you a little bit longer tonight. One of the things that you have to, in the coming weeks, almost visualize as we begin to open this up is the morning after the rapture. People are going to hit their snooze button because they don't want to go to work. Okay, sometimes we get in our heads that there's going to be this great rapture and everything's going to change. No. What's going to happen is the next day people are going to go to work trying to figure out where everybody went. Okay? Indeed's going to have a major uptick in job applications because they're going to need to be filled. Okay? And so that's the other reason why I think stuff is happening so much, is because in order for one person to be able to step on the scene and bring peace to a world, it's going to have to get pretty bad before that can happen. And that's what takes place after the rapture, is the beast comes out of the sea, the Bible says, and will come and begin. And when it says beast, it's a person. Okay? They're using colorful language to identify. And that person is going to unite and bring peace to a troubled world. And if there's no trouble worldwide, there's no need for that person to come to the fore. So some of what we're experiencing is the ramp up to get ready. Does that make sense? Praise God. Next week, we'll be continuing again at 6:30. And things are going to be happening and kicking off. We're going to get into some of the more nitty-gritty stuff besides. I know this stuff can be interesting if you're really into it. But just remember this. After all that we said tonight, just remember this. That to Abraham is given the land, the seed, and the blessing. And it's all going to get fulfilled in the future.